Coming up, scientists ponder over how to feed an increasing number of people on the planet and tackle global warming simultaneously.
Our interest is to make insects as an alternative for the use of soybean-derived proteins.
Researchers in Germany look to insects for the solution.
Obviously, a lot of people have to get past the gag factor.
Which doesn't make much sense because we'll happily eat prawns, which are fairly closely related and look not dissimilar, really.
We check out an initiative in Sri Lanka that's set to greatly reduce the gas emissions of the popular tuk-tuk taxis. But first, Uruguay is wading through troubled waters. Dwindling fresh H2O supplies have forced the government to get creative.
Como en cierta forma, haciendo tomar agua sucia.
Se puede aclarar, ¿el agua está limpia para beber?
Los valores de sales en el agua potable que se distribuye en realidad están superando los valores de la normativa.
Está viendo solo 2 grados por TRT World. We've often discussed the water shortages in areas like the Horn of Africa and Western United States. Parts of South America too are having serious problems. Uruguay is going through its worst drinking water supply crisis in decades. Look at this dried up reservoir in the south of the country. This is the Grande reservoir, and its main purpose is to supply drinking water to the capital, Montevideo, where more than 1.3 million people live. The reservoir is also used in irrigation systems. And Uruguayans blame a lack of proper infrastructure and hydrographic planning, as well as policies that prioritize the private sector. To address the country's water woes, the government began mixing brackish water with its dwindling supplies of fresh water. And in response, people took to the streets.
Que nos estén, como en cierta forma, haciendo tomar agua sucia. O sea, cambiándonos lo que nos han hecho usar durante muchos años, desde que soy niño y yo hoy que soy adulto, que tengo 41 años, me cambien el sabor del agua.
And the Uruguayan government's been trying to assure people the move won't affect their health and well-being.
El Uruguay está pasando el peor déficit hídrico desde que se empezaron a tomar registros, o sea, desde hace 74 años. Y diciendo que le vamos a asegurar el suministro de agua de esta situación, de esta calidad que hoy está teniendo, que es apta para consumo humano, pero con niveles mayores de lo que teníamos hasta el momento, por lo menos hasta hace un tiempo atrás, vinculados a sodios y cloruros. Por eso se va a construir la semana que viene una represa para asegurar la estabilidad de la reserva de Paso Severino, que va a mantener el estatus y la calidad de agua que tenemos hoy.
Escuché de lo que está haciendo el gobierno para que haya más agua disponible para el público. ¿Se puede aclarar, el agua está limpia para beber y cuál es el sabor?
Hoy en día lo que está afectando el abastecimiento de agua potable es la ciudad de Montevideo y su entorno, el área metropolitana de Montevideo, donde vive más de la mitad de la población del país. 1.700.000 habitantes aproximadamente. El país todo viven 3 millones y poco. Pero bueno, el problema que estamos teniendo ahora es que desde hace ya más de una semana los valores de sales en el agua potable que se distribuye en realidad están superando los valores de la normativa. Por lo tanto, el agua no se puede considerar potable. Si bien, problemas sanitarios no existen, o sea, hay abastecimiento, pero no podemos considerar que es agua potable.
Yo estaba leyendo que la gente también está enfadada por la cantidad de agua dulce a la que tiene acceso el sector privado. ¿Cuál es la situación para el agua para el sector privado contra el sector público?
No, en realidad la red de agua potable abastece a todo, al sector público, digamos, a los habitantes y también a las industrias, muchas veces. Hay industrias que tienen sus propias perforaciones, pozos, y se abastecen de agua subterránea, o clubes deportivos, pero bueno, no son todos ni tampoco todos se abastecen de la red de agua pública.
Y la última pregunta, Daniel, ¿cuándo llegarán las lluvias para paliar el problema? ¿Sabes?
Bueno, digamos, ahora hay algunas previsiones de lluvias, de precipitaciones próximas, pero no muy grandes. O sea que este tema puede seguir un tiempo indeterminado, que no hay una certeza exacta, digamos, de cuándo vamos a tener lluvias que puedan revertir la situación.
Ok, muchísimas gracias otra vez, Daniel. Lo aprecio mucho y espero que todo mejorará pronto.
Bueno, esperemos, pero la situación es preocupante, porque si no mejora, la situación es que va empeorando.
From too little water in Uruguay to too much in Italy, floods in the northern Emilia-Romagna region have driven thousands of people from their homes. Extreme weather phenomena are the norm now, and it's all taking a financial toll on every country. Several people were killed in Italy in mid-May as torrential rains caused more than 20 rivers to overflow. There have been hundreds of landslides, and roads have been damaged and destroyed. Well, agriculture too has been hit. More than 5,000 farms were left underwater. So droughts in some parts of the world, too much rain in others. Meanwhile, there are many effects of climate change that aren't widely reported. Here's a look at a few of those lesser-known impacts.
It's bad news for wine and coffee lovers. Grape crops are temperature sensitive, and global warming could mean less wine. Areas good for growing could shrink by more than 70%.
This harvest, we had to deal with the dryness, with a very large lake of water. Last vintage, we have to deal with the frost, and it's true that we have a real impact with the global warming on our production.
Frosts and droughts lead to smaller coffee harvests. Tasty beans need stable growing temperatures, and the best areas to grow them could be cut in half by 2050.
Kahawa tulipata shida nyingi. Unajua kahawa, jua ikiwaka sana inapata magonjwa, inamwaga matawi, mbegu hasiku expand, na wakati baridi iliingia.
Travelers could also see bumpier flights. Air circulation patterns are becoming less predictable, and turbulence is getting harder to predict. And there's more. Studies predict every degree of global warming will come with a 12% rise in lightning, because warmer air holds more moisture, meaning more storms. Already around 8 million strikes hit the Earth daily. As glaciers on active volcanoes melt, pressure on the Earth's surface goes down, changing the direction of magma flows. Scientists say this could lead to more eruptions. The gender of lizards, crocodiles, turtles, and many fish depends on the temperature. Warming results in more females than males, threatening many species with extinction. Higher temperatures also make frogs in Puerto Rico smaller, which is raising the pitch of their mating calls. Goats are also shrinking. They need less weight to stay warm, making them more vulnerable to freezing in cold winters. Climate experts say if we don't get global warming under control, even more unusual and unpredictable consequences are likely in store. Sarah Balter, Just 2 Degrees.
To the world of insects now. I don't mean to gross you out, but there is considerable research into the nutritional value of cockroaches, ants, worms, and the like. These aren't the regular bugs you find on the streets or in dark alleys. Insects for consumption are grown in sterile environments with no real threat of disease. If that does not settle your stomach, how about knowing that eating bugs help the planet? Change your mind yet?
Industrial production of insects is growing worldwide, with some farms producing up to 100 tons of insects per year. It's a cuisine that's slowly gaining popularity across different cultures. Scientists believe it brings us closer to a healthier planet with every bite.
To make it clear, we are not interested to convince the people to eat insects. here in Europe or in Northern America. Our interest is to make insects as an alternative for the use of soybean-derived proteins, because the large-scale growth of soybean is a major reason for the deforestation of the rainforest. So, and to have a more sustainable production of proteins, we need alternatives, and I see insects as a perfect tool to produce food and feed for aquaculture and also for livestock.
Wilczynska says protein from insects can be used in many ways. The lipids, which are the molecules that make up the structure and function of living cells, can be developed into high-quality lubricants to replace fossil oil. It can also be used in the production of cosmetics, and it's friendlier to the environment. But conserving the environment isn't as simple as swallowing scarab beetles. Protein derived from bugs is expensive, more so than foods like soya beans. To make insect farming more economical, Fraunhofer Institute suggests also getting high-value products from insects.
So we are developing diets for insects based on agricultural industrial side streams that cannot be used otherwise. And on the other hand, you can also develop higher added value products. Practically everything resulting from insects can be developed to product.
In Indonesia and Malaysia, for instance, large amounts of waste from palm oil production is usually burnt or left to rot. Both processes release greenhouse gases.
They are now also, let's say, reared in large scale to produce a biofertilizer. It means the leftovers from the large-scale production of insect is called frass. It consists of excrements, but also chitinous skins of the larvae, and also of food leftovers. And we could show that this insect frass is a very good biofertilizer.
Protein from insects can be used to make foods such as protein bars, burger patties, and falafel. While on the beverage side, milkshakes and soft drinks. It can also come through in making confectionaries such as candies, chocolates, ice cream, and cookies. It may be more palatable to imagine spending money on products like these, right? But getting serious about global warming may take putting your mouth where your money is. Dominic Brian Omondi, Just 2 Degrees.
All right, so there's still clearly lots to learn about insects, Dave. First, let's talk about insects as food. Besides the nutritional value, are there benefits for the planet, for the environment, if insect food production was done on a large scale?
Yeah. So insects can be reared in a much smaller amount of space. They require a lot less water, and they're more efficient at turning material that we can't eat into something we can eat than cows or chickens or whatever else we might choose to farm. And also they can eat things which are waste products that are otherwise useless and actually potentially damaging. So, for example, kitchen scraps that you might collect from restaurants, you can feed them to insects, and that both gets rid of the waste, which otherwise might rot and produce methane, and turns it into something useful, protein that we can either eat directly or use as animal food, which is another option with insect protein.
Obviously, a lot of people have to get past the gag factor when it comes to insects. How grand a scale could we do this? In Dominic's report, we talked about insect ice cream, insect milkshakes. How do we get people past the idea that this is just something that's gross and think larger scale? Is that even possible?
It's an interesting one. I mean, actually, the most in Asia and Africa and South America, it's quite common to eat insects. And it's just, it depends on the culture. You know, in Europe and North America, we don't have a culture of eating insects at all. And as you say, it's seen as kind of something that's a bit repulsive, which doesn't make much sense because we'll happily eat prawns, which are fairly closely related and look not dissimilar really. But somehow a locust is disgusting and a prawn is delicious. So I guess there's no reason why we couldn't overcome that. But one approach, of course, would be to disguise the insects. You know, perhaps people don't want to eat a whole locust or
Chocolate
cricket.
spiders, even.
Yeah. But if it's ground up and made into a flour, and something like that, and then can be baked into something that looks nothing at all like an insect, then I don't really see why that couldn't prove popular.
Do you think we have the room, the space to produce insects on a scale that it's actually feeding people?
Well, they take much less space than other livestock, chickens, pigs, cows, sheep. So if they were replacing cows, partly, I mean, clearly we wouldn't replace them entirely with insects, but if some of the protein that we currently get from eating beef was instead acquired from insects, then actually that would use less space overall, because insects can be reared in huge densities, in tiny spaces, and it could be done in warehouses or enclosed spaces close to where people live, close to the consumer potentially.
There's always been a lot of a backlash when it comes to raising and eating any animal, particularly from animal rights activists. What kind of feedback do you think raising and killing insects would get from like an organization, say, like PETA?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it seems to me that there are far fewer concerns with mass rearing insects than with mass rearing other livestock, and I'm completely disgusted by some of the conditions that animals are reared in around the world. It's horrific when you see the density that chickens and pigs are kept at in intensive industrial farming. It's really cruel. But I wouldn't, and this is speaking as someone who loves insects, I would be much less concerned about crickets or mealworms or black soldier flies. Their brains are much tinier. They're much simpler creatures. Their capacity for suffering might still be there, but must be orders of magnitude less than that of a cow or a chicken, I would say.
And from insects to big mammals and feral horses, better known as brumbies in Australia. The government there, on the advice of local scientists, is considering killing the horses which roam wild in the Australian Alps. Some researchers believe the horses could lead to the extinction of 6 critically endangered animals and at least 2 critically endangered plants. That's because of the way the horses graze and trample on vegetation and waterways. It may be an easy call for Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who has a zero extinctions goal, which the brumbies could prevent him from reaching. If the government decides to eliminate the horses, this could be the second animal slaughtering in the country over environmental concerns after they culled thousands of camels back in 2020. Before we leave you, there's some good news out of Sri Lanka. A 5-year project was launched in May to reduce the gas emissions of tuk-tuk taxis. 500,000 of them will shift from petrol to electric power. But there's debate over the plan's practicality. People are saying, okay, it sounds great, but what about the logistics?
The following is a tale of 7 friends who embarked on an epic adventure across India. They would travel 3,500 kilometers across the country at breakneck speed. Well, maybe not breakneck.
Tuk-tuks have been glorified in the past as the most fun way to travel in Southeast Asia. Movies like The Rickshaw Run portrayed the three-wheeler as easy to drive and even easier on the pocket. But things are different in the real world. Sri Lanka is ranked in the top 50 countries with the worst air quality, and the country's nearly 1.2 million tuk-tuks only add to the pollution. But a new plan's been rolled out to change the status quo.
Globally, the energy shortage, increasing cost of energy, climate emergencies, and global warming all point to the need to accelerate efforts towards decarbonization of a society and economy. Here in Sri Lanka, the ongoing economic crisis, characterized by the limited access to affordable energy, reinforces the need to invest in renewable energy options and also to phase out fossil fuel.
The Sri Lankan government and the United Nations are working together to reduce the emissions of 500,000 tuk-tuks that run on petrol. The UN will fund the conversion of the first batch of 200 tuk-tuks from petrol to electric power, Plans for the rest will be ironed out based on the results of the rollout. But off the bat, taxi drivers questioned how the system would operate.
අපිට දැන් පෙට්‍රල් ඕනම දැනකින් ගහ ගන්න පුළුවන් නේ. ඕනම සෙට් එකකින් ගහ ගන්න පුළුවන්. දැන් මේකේ හයර් එක කිලෝමීටර් 100යි 80යි දුවන්න පුළුවන් කියන්නේ. ඒතර අපි අවුට් ස්ටේෂන් එකක් ගියොත් එහෙම කොහමද? අවුට් ස්ටේෂන් එකක් ගියොත් කිලෝමීටර් 150ක හයර් එකක් ගියොත් එහෙම මග නතර වෙලා ඉන්න තමයි වෙන්නේ.
It's a legitimate concern, of course, particularly as Sri Lanka has been struggling with economic and energy crises. Many people just don't have the luxury to consider anything that doesn't put cash in their hands, food on the table. But for as many dubious voices, there are an equal number of people optimistic of the plant's potential.
The basic advantage of having an electric three-wheeler is basically it is mainly for the environment, that you are not actually emitting any harmful gases, as well as for your pocket, because you will be completely saved the fuel that you are burning, the petrol cost. You will be only charging the electric vehicle using the electricity, which is more cheaper than purchasing petrol.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Just 2 Degrees. Hope to see you next time. Bye.